Okay. Thank you all for being present. Um, the question that we asked, where you from, and trying not to answer um, that with a geopolitical spot has often been um, one substitution besides a watershed would be in the land of, and you name an indigenous group
Mhm.
to honor their presence and to acknowledge that they were usurped or a lot worse language by colonists. And um, but come to find out that that's not really an easy substitution. That various indigenous tribes supplanted other ones, often brutally. And so to talk about whose land it was at some time, you know, actually may go counter to any kind of, indigenous, rather a regenerative lens. Because in some ways it was nobody's land. It's all of our land. Um, we just decided to put names to it or call it. Um, which kind of comes to a larger question about story of place, to something that um, I guess in a framework is the ground of the tetrad. Where are we today? What are we here? And through travels, I've noted that the story of place, at least the history of place, keeps changing. When I was down in Peru last, um, still figuring out, the history of the Incas, what happened to them, why, and things of that sort, and the sophistication of the culture. I'm also reminded of, when I understand when California was colonized, it was a very complex regenerative agricultural uh, economy, and colonists came in and said, we got to clean up this mess and just have fields and fields with the same crop year after year and depleting the soil where had been a much smarter regenerative agriculture going on. So it comes to the question of, we call about an evolving story of place, and how do we accept the premise that the story of a place can evolve, both in the past or the future? And then that leads to the question, does the essence evolve? Is there an essence to a place that exists, or is the essence I feel in the place different than the essence that you feel? Just because we've all come from different backgrounds. So it's going to kind of open up on how you feel about the evolution of a story of place. What's coming up for everybody.
Well, since we had Karen and Francis join us, maybe I'll just summarize. I think Josh's questions are can the essence of a place evolve and change over time? And if so, I guess
I guess we
how
lost
to,
Carrie. Is that right?
it looks that way. Yeah. And if so, I guess if they can evolve, right, how does that work and what kind of time frame are we talking about? And um, yeah, what are
Yeah.
the
Well, what are the implications?
right, what are the implications? Hmm.
Yeah, while you're thinking, I'll give another aspect of it. Um, we were told that the regenerative approach to gardening is to go back to native plants who have over centuries, millennia evolved to be the plants that can be nurtured by the place without um, artificial irrigation or pesticides and all of that, except that our places have changed. I was told, amazed that the uh, Champagne, or the area called Champagne in France, no longer can grow the grapes that are used for champagne. because the climate has changed. And so there's no champagne from Champagne. And ran into in my travels in Israel where they said that Israel turned out to have a great climate for Malbec, that they can't grow the grapes in Europe anymore.
Mm.
So they are exporting it tourists can't have Malbec. They get so much more money for it by selling it up in Europe. Um, and that's kind of what's happening. So that story of place has changed. Any examples you can think of where you might have seen the evolution?
I have a curious question. And this is really coming from a place of ignorance. I'm I've spent quite a bit of time in Carol Sanford School,
Mhm.
and I less time with Regenesis, and so I don't know what correlates or what may not. But in Carol School, I'm familiar with the essence triad and the core value, core purpose, and core process being.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you all bring the same lens to the essence of place when you're considering place?
Yes.
Okay,
I would say generally we all have different lenses, but
sure, of course, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
still
But
oh,
a
absolutely.
framework that's alive.
so the Regenesis storing place process has us look at all this history of a place,
Yeah.
geologic, hydrologic, biological, ecosystems, human history, right? And then the idea is then you look and you interview people that live there, and you do this whole process. And then what you're doing is you're starting to look back at all that information, and you're trying to find the patterns.
Hmm.
And usually those patterns are then expressed as process, purpose, and value.
Right. Yep. Right. That's really
That's
clarifying.
essentially the Regenesis storing place process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's that's great. That brings up a further question in terms of, yeah, that relationship between essence in that framework and then how it expresses itself over time and how that may evolve. Right.
Yeah.
I'm,
So
go ahead, Marcus.
I was just going to say that, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is, you know, what, we need to define what we mean by time, I guess, or the time frame. Um, so in geologic time, right, with plate tectonics and right, some places disappear underwater, or right, the underlying geology and hydrology and geomorphology and all that changes so dramatically. And so it's a question I have in my mind. Does does that change? I'm trying to go to like an extreme, like
Hmm.
long, long time ago in a land far, far away, right? Um, and right, does that change the essence of that particular place? Right, when all the underlying structure is totally different.
That's exactly where I was going. And I'm thinking about imaging the Finger Lakes where I live, and I hope that the filter is filtering out this super loud cafe behind me.
It's good.
Um, okay, good.
You're good.
Um, it was like this was under a mile of ice, right?
Right.
And that melting of that ice is what carved the Finger Lakes, which is what is a lot of the characteristics of this place. So I guess what I'm loving in this inquiry is I've often thought about this. Like, when you learn about Pangea and like that it was one big mass of land and everything shifted, like obviously Earth will keep shifting, right? The tectonics are not done, right? They're dynamic and floating on top of this core. The fact that we have such a limited time scope in which we think is always been mind-boggling to me. But really thinking of Earth as a changing being who goes through phases of ice and warmer and look where we're headed now, and um like building that capability to actually hold deep time as a human in my tiny blip of a life, and how I make contribution, I think is really like that's really profound.
And
So
I'm even so
I don't
you're
I don't know if essence changes, but like feels like it. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and you're going back to a relatively recent time frame
Mhm.
in the geologic framing of it, right?
Yeah.
The ice age was the last ice age was relatively recent.
And some of those that land that connected Denmark to England had communities in it. It was being
Yeah,
farmed.
yeah.
This is not pre-human.
Well, again, even, uh, back to Pangea, right? The mountains in Scotland and
Mhm.
on the west coast of Africa are were the same mountains that are the Appalachians and the mountains in New England
Right.
at one point, right? So,
So
So
I'm
Marcus talked about far, far away. Uh, Karen's talking about Pangea, but bringing this question of consciousness of place and essence of place to a much closer time frame,
right,
a thought was triggered for me from the earlier discussion about the Delaware Valley and native plants, because of course, the idea of native plant versus invasive plant is all dependent on the point in time in which
right.
the cutoff between what was native then. I'm involved in a project, and we arbitrarily but very successfully have used John Bartram's book of native plants as our guide. And as far as consciousness of place goes, everybody that we're interacting with is happy with that approach. So some of the Lenape people that we work with,
Mhm.
they're fine with that. Suburban people are fine with it. The academic people are fine with it. But it is inherently arbitrary to do that. So I would tie the acceptance of that idea to a little bit the consciousness of this place right now, but it diverges a tiny bit from what the essence of this place is.
Right.
so
But I think one of the things with essence is it's not based on the collection of things in a place, right? It's what are the patterns that emerge within, right, those places. And and I think there's a premise that at least in some reasonably long time frame, maybe not right, ancient geologic time, that those patterns, right, hold throughout history, at least maybe, human history.
so
Um,
I'm
so
going
that I
through
think there's a premise in the essence work around place that at least absent some huge disruption like an ice age or something like that, that those patterns are still there, even though the elements that make up those patterns are subject to change. I think there's a premise there. And I think
and
that's part of what we're testing, right? So do the patterns change, I think is right. Not do the items in the place change.
Francis?
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay, wasn't sure. So I'm just going to share a little bit of my experience right now as I'm working on a project with Bill and Joel in the Dominican Republic, um, and doing a story of place, which is now turned more into a advanced IDP because of how fast they were going. But one of the things that we're looking at is, well, Joel came in and basically showed us maps of how the island was formed, and it was essentially formed by all of these separated pieces of land that clashed together. So it was volcanic collisions that happened millions of years ago. And and it was interesting because as we were there and with the team, they were like, no, this is not volcanic. This was never volcanic. And because you don't see any alive volcanoes. But the comparison that was made that was really interesting to me is how that actually has shown up in how the people operate. The collision, the diversity that was created as a result of that collision on the land, the actual people and place it's extremely diverse. It's got 7 different ecosystems as an island, and at the same time, it's he called it potentiating collisions. It's one of the things that we're looking at in the essence triad, and I do believe that and we've seen this is land that, again, it's been for many, many years now, it's been grasslands, but at some point it was a rainforest. And so I'm thinking and going back to the essence of it, it's still those collisions, it's still that diversity, even though it's been millions of years. So how the comparison of how the geology still reflects in the people and today. That's what I've been seeing in this, and I don't know if it relates the same way to other places. I'd have to analyze other places and see how that really affects it, but that's what's showing up for us right now in this story of place process. So, and I, it's, and it, I do also, and it also got me thinking of the place that we're working in right now. Um, it's changed a lot throughout the years. It used to be very isolated, and now it's becoming a high level tourist destination. And there was, at some point, indigenous people there, but that was long gone. Then it became a center for drug trade, and that's what it's been known for in the most recent years. And they're trying to clean that up. So it's again collisions, again diversity, even when you're going into how different it's become throughout the years. I don't know if I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to make sense of it all myself as I go through it, but thought it was useful to share. Good to see you all.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Manhattan, as I mean, the essence of Manhattan. It's hard to imagine it being an agricultural community, with a few docks, and of course that essence has changed.
So
I'm also, reminded of the admonition that humans tend to see patterns because that's what we like to see, and we have to put a pattern on things, and it sometimes to find the pattern we kind of stretch things around. I know that the city of Harrisburg, where I've lived for 35 years, when I moved there, I was told that its pattern was the fact that it was between the Great Valley and the Susquehanna River, and it was a transportation, and it grew because it was an intersection, and only to find out that it was really a plantation because of the great fertile land from the annual floods, bringing better soil in and offering the water. And in fact, it was built by enslaved people, which is not something our school children are learning about the history. It's all about a transportation hub, and it's continued to be a transportation hub. And of course, it's not. The land is too valuable for commercial purposes other than for agriculture. Um, but having understood a different story of that place has really affected my whole understanding of what the essence of Harrisburg really is. That it's
yeah,
really, the
it's at least both of those things and a lot more, right?
right, but
Yeah.
the histories that we like to hide.
So
Yeah,
just real quick, are you familiar with the book Mannahatta?
no.
So someone did a whole study of what Manhattan looked like before it got developed, and there's a whole book about it. It's
Hmm.
absolutely fascinating. So if you want to see what Manhattan looked like before colonization, um, it's a great book.
There's also a digital project about that, which
Right. Yeah.
digitally recreates it.
Yep.
Could someone drop that in here to see if I typed it right? And I guess this brings up this
I
whole
think they're
thing of
close
like
now.
human capabilities and feeling like, you know, again, thinking about what is that wonderful book, Changes in the Land?
Hmm.
How when, you know, Europeans landed here in North America, we're like, oh, there's nothing, nobody's doing anything here. But actually, a lot of the ecosystems were intentionally tended to be like open savanna, maximize hunting and foraging. Um, and so it's kind of like, I guess the question I'm asking, and then I think about, when everything is a strip mall, right? There's the difference between, are we working with the patterns in place and the essence of place, or are we imposing a template? And the default is impose a template, right? Because we've lost or not cultivated or whatever the ability to work with the patterns in ways that increase the vitality, viability, evolution of place. I think again also about the whole invasive species thing, like the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer is so wonderful because her point is sweetgrass needs to be in relation with us. Sweetgrass doesn't survive on its own in the wild. It survives by people actually going and tending the plots. So it's like that's a very clear intervention. But when I think about it, if it, could it be like you're imposing a template? Or how do we know if we're imposing a template? Oh, sweetgrass should grow everywhere. But then when I think about it, if it becomes a way of being with the land, a way of being in place so that you can sense into what's emerging and you're creating this into a ceremonial thing, that feels very different than, I have to have, and I taught permaculture forever, but I'll joke, like I have to have an herb spiral in every permaculture design is like, it's like the default uh problem, I would say, that comes out of a lot of permaculture courses. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just sitting with all that.
One of the questions we often hear in the school, or maybe not often enough, is the simple two-word question, so what? You know, how important is to know the true story of place or as it evolves? And, is this something and the essence, and are we capable in trying to look at whole systems to develop an essence that may not have been the original essence of the place? And recognizing that, just like every stream, it's not the same place, you know, a minute after you step into it. In terms of the work that each of us are undertaking, how important, is knowing the story of place or determining the essence in terms of planning for the future. Francis, please.
So thank you for bringing that up. It's like to me, before kind of engaging in the work, to me, I've always seen a story of place as this is going to be the answer of what's going to catalyze and connect all of the stakeholders and, create that collective purpose and that collective inspiration. But I've started to question a lot because the story changes and because all of the interests are different. But at the same time, I still have a level of hope that we can because we can find something that is going to be that that glue that comes from and that it's based on a story of place and it's based on a history. And if there's anything I'm seeing is that there is a deep longing from many for that history to come back and sort of for that culture to be preserved and for the essence of things to actually be there. But it's only obviously only a certain group of stakeholders always. It's the other there's
Make
the
America
other
great again.
sorry.
Make America great again.
Oh, it's like yeah, but I guess to me, the level of importance is how much is it going to affect the implementation of the work that we're doing in the project and the ability for us to actually um, execute on what we are there to do. What is the impact that that is really going to have, you know, in across time, not just for that particular period of time, but just as we leave and all of that. That's what I hold space for.
I just want to
Terry.
jump in real quick. I'm going to suggest that any story of place answer that we come up with is always a candidate. It's never the final answer, right? It's that group of stakeholders. You're not obviously not talking to everybody, and it's always a candidate. So the question that comes up in that for me is, what's the purpose, right? Why do we do story plays? Why, what's it useful for? And right. If it's not the answer, what's it useful for? Sorry, Terry, I didn't mean to
No,
jump.
no worries at all. Um, there's a, I'm not as familiar as you all are on the kind of background theory of regenesis. So I come from this a different direction with background in cultural anthropology and just the stewardship I do where we live. And during this conversation, there's a fragment of my experience that to me seems relevant to what we're talking about. And I just wanted to throw it out for reaction. So I've taught for a number of years at Penn a course involving Chinese and American culture. And the first 2 slides or 3 slides that I show at the beginning of the year, one is just a square with a strong diagonal, black and white. And I kind of basically say this is the Western ethical framework, and your job is to stay on one side of that line and not go on the other. And that line is imposed by an external authority. And then for the Chinese one, a little stereotypically, I show the yin yang image. But then for the Western students, I say, yeah, this is a representation of kind of the Chinese conception, but it doesn't capture the Chinese conception. And then you have to animate it and show the black and the white swirling around and the white dot getting big and the black dot getting big. And it's a dynamic process. So my question in terms of this conversation is, it seems to me that the patterns we're talking about for essence of place are somewhat like the dynamic version, but that the consciousness of place that human actors have at any particular time point tends to be much more like one static moment from that. And I've always been conscious teaching that course that, wow, had I been trying to teach it 20 years earlier, I wouldn't have had the technology to even show that or maybe 30 years earlier, in a immediate, compelling way. So the technology change has made it possible to go from that static view to the dynamic view. And I'm just wondering whether that personal experience of mine is kind of relevant to what we're talking about here.
It completely aligns with the dynamic, with the framework thinking. So what a three-term framework represents, which is the essence triad, is a three-term framework. What that represents is dynamism. Right? You get into a 4-term framework, then it's about activity. You get into 5, right? So there are different term frameworks, and they kind of represent different aspects of wholeness, for lack of a better word. So yeah, I see it completely aligning with what you're saying.
It also speaks to evolution, things evolving.
Yep.
No story of place.
Dynamic, right?
You say it's a snapshot, right? And then a year later, it's incomplete. That it's missing
Very
a
quickly
number of
for
the
my
Williams.
benefit, where's the single place that you would recommend I go to read about these 3 and 4 term frameworks? Because I'm not very familiar with them.
So probably the best place to start would be J.G. Bennett's book on elemental systematics.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Regenesis also has a great course on that
Yeah, and there's a systematics
if you
course
really
that
want to geek out,
Pamela
that's your
teaches. Yeah.
opportunity. Another term that is used in business as cautionary is nostalgia. Is that, great businesses are become, if they become nostalgic about their origins, the origin story or their principles, that's a surefire way of not keeping up with the economy. And we one of the great questions is asked to CEOs is if someone was going to buy your company, if you were going to buy your company, what would you change? And how much is existing in a company because that's the way we always did it, or that person's been there for 35 years, and even though they're not producing anymore, they're loyal. So therefore, what we do, and in some ways, story of place becomes nostalgic. We talked about native and invasive, and you talked about plants, and in my mind suddenly popped in the words people. The great nativist fights in New York City, and the fights we're having right now about who the natives are and who those invasives are, and what those invasives might do to our, to change the essence of where we are. And maybe that's, a million-year-old conflict that this is just the latest small addition to it. And so there may be even some dangers in doing that. I've also recalled, what we would call gap analysis when we're looking for how to develop something and, what is missing in this community from it being vibrant and or vital and vibrant. And sometimes we feel that, the essence is missing something and that we need to, there's no, I'll go back to the city of Harrisburg. There was no university there. There was no higher education going on. And so there was not any incubators where you had professors who were doing work on their own research or developing products and couldn't tap into grad students, and grad students couldn't get exposed to it. And so the idea was to change the essence or add to the essence perhaps of the place and add a university, a technical university, uh, from that. Corinne.
I'm going to jump in there because so I'm looking at the essence of the Finger Lakes. And one of them is democratizing. Makes total sense, right? Like the Iroquois, so-called Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee, and the Iroquois Confederacy, and how we learned democracy. The founding fathers, doing all my air quotes here, learned democracy from the Haudenosaunee.
According to Ken Burns, yeah.
What?
According to Ken Burns.
Well,
that's the premise of his new series on the American Revolution.
Yeah, I mean it's
anyway
pretty much fact. And women became suffrage activated for the right to vote because they saw that Indigenous women had rights to their children, rights to their property. They were clan mothers. They installed and disinstalled, the chiefs and stuff. Anyway, I think about, we also have Cornell University here. And I'm like, is saying every place needs a university that template thing? Because when I think about what may be taught at Cornell is sure as hell not, even in the best political science course, from what I've learned about how the Haudenosaunee practice democracy, it is what we think of as democracy is an absolute stripped down, emaciated, I could just go off, right? Version. Right. So this whole thing of like like in the United States, I feel like we've all turned off our brain about what democracy actually is. We are not a paragon of an example of democracy by any means. Um, so I guess that's this question again for me of like, are we actually capable of really interrogating what the essence of play, something about these potentializing collisions you're talking about, Francis, of like what they can make possible of in us if we stay awake versus if we, I mean, even at Do Good, right? It's about ideals and convincing everyone else our ideals, which is like the best version of what we do as the United States as an empire. But most of that is, in my opinion, under the veil, like hidden, or it's a premise for actually extracting value. So I think there's a lot around how do we develop ourselves to be incredibly rigorous about developing our capacity and capability to look into what is the VVE, the vitality, viability, and evolution of this essence regenerated all the time. And I'll just say, when I think about, let me just, okay. So when I think about how the founding fathers stripped the women out and embedded racism in to our democracy, right? So they basically dehumanized the humans, and also, Earth is other. Earth was not a relationship, and we had no responsibility other than to settle. It became an abomination. And I'm not saying the world would be better if we were all just embracing indigenous ways, but had we had the capability to come here and be like, whoa, they've got something going on that, wow, is a developmental opportunity. Imagine, right? Imagine what could have been possible as opposed to the domination paradigm that we could not shake.
So
The global my people.
I'm I'm totally with you. I totally agree. Can you bring the connection back to essence for us? Essence of place and
Mm.
Yeah, so if the essence of, okay, so democratizing, eddying, and innovating is the triangle for the
what
Finger
you've
Lakes
got for Ithaca.
candidates,
Okay.
right?
Right.
And so I'm thinking innovating, right? So if we were able, right, like the Two-Row Wampum was an innovation by the Haudenosaunee to say, each in their own boat. We are not going to be in charge of your boat. You're not going to be in charge of our boat, but we're going to live together, right? And had we been able to innovate at that place of like, we're a developmental opportunity for you, and you're a developmental opportunity for us, just think what could have happened. So, instead of that, we've basically, in my opinion, kind of had templating, right? We go and now the US tries to go and install democracy in other countries, which again, I could go on forever, but that's how I see it tying back.
So do we go in and, in our development projects, and do we try to recapture the essence? How do we, is democracy an essence of a place?
Something that's been emerging for me over the past handful of minutes. It harkens back to Bennett's work again, but I'm in my mind playing with the idea of how does essence correlate with the implicate order and potential energy that hasn't yet emerged, and so it brings a whole new lens to it for me that takes it out of the functional and into the I mean, energy kind of feels process oriented to me. It's movement, right? Um, so I'm just curious to, and I don't know where that goes. I don't, yeah, I have no idea how to rationalize that further, but that's just really curious for me. And um, yeah, I'm just seeing those energies at work, not from a place of function or even judgment, but just like what is there or what is under the surface that wants to emerge that isn't yet
Right.
revealed.
So I asked earlier what's the purpose of right revealing essence or right exploring this even? What's the value of it? Why do we do this? And what was coming up for me in answering my own question, it ties right into what you're saying. I think it's an unveiling of the potential,
Yeah.
right? It's a way to try to express what the potential of that place could be, as much as it is an attempt to try and describe what it is and where it all came from, and right. But it's that, yeah, you were referring to it as the implicate order, right? It's what's out there in potential that can open up once we see how this place works, right? And the other thing that's coming up for me is how do we, this notion that Josh is bringing, right? Does essence change? And how would we test that? Right. So one of the ways that we play with those things, right, is look at it at maybe different levels or different scales, right? So does the essence of a person change over a lifetime, right? Try and keep it as opposed to, right, this big thing we call place. And does that, if, whatever the answer is, does that hold as you scale up to different levels or different nested systems?
And if it changes, can we change it?
Right.
Do we
Right.
have the agency? You know,
Well, there's that whole notion of nodal intervention, right? So,
right,
yeah. Are
the
we are
locus of
we
control.
are we nodally trying to change the essence, or are we nodally trying to change a pattern that then aligns with the essence? I don't know.
So I took the liberty of sharing the questions with my little team chat in the group where Bill and Joel are at. And I want to share kind of what each one said. Bill's comment was premise is the essence does not evolve. Our understanding of it does, which kind of feels like is what we're
Right.
doing here in some ways,
Yeah.
right? And then thinking about the evolution and what is it that we're able to do with all of this? Joel said developing a community's ability to evolve the expression of essence potential is the focus that we can steward. I thought that was pretty cool, so I felt like it was a good thing to share.
Thank you.
Certainly helping me as to how I can hold
And,
all
and
of
what I'm
this.
hearing is essence is subjective.
Isn't everything though?
Yeah,
Through the frame of see it. Yeah.
hopefully physics is not subjective and chemistry, biology, but
So let's go.
And that depends who you ask.
Mm.
So let's
But
so let's go back though to the Finger Lakes under a mile thick ice and before. Like because I can rationalize in my brain that when the Finger Lakes is under a mile thick of ice and hasn't carved Finger Lakes and whatever, that there's still the essence that we're, blah 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 that we're in some form. It's just maybe not as manifest in the physical world, right? Like the Finger Lakes is very much about eddying as the core process. That makes sense to me. So maybe there was already some eddying, just it looks different. Um, but if there's no like before that, if we're like when there were no humans here, when it was Pangea, like I'm like, like I think that's where there has to be some zooming in and out of time frame for me in my brain. Like that's where I'm trying to parse that out.
Yeah. You're trying to figure out how does essence express in,
Yeah.
yeah. with huge changes like that. Yeah.
Well, so then I'm thinking, okay, just like a baby, right? Like a baby has essence, but how would you know one infant from another infant a month in what their essence is? Like it takes a while for their faculties to develop enough that they can really show who they are. So maybe it's like that. Like,
It's essence expression, yeah.
mm-hmm. Hmm.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Karen. I asked my mom what she thought my essence was from the moment I was born. And she said sweetness. She's like the moment you were born, you were immediately sweet. And you know, like it's kind of interesting how you I think maybe a mother after probably a mother would be able to answer like about her child and specifically whether they immediately see the same thing as a grown up than they did when you were un not tainted, if you will.
Yeah, as a mom, I'll have to think about that because I definitely like got a hit of who my child was right away. I mean, one of them, I had the honor of actually like pulling her out the
Oh my
last
God.
few,
Wow.
and like I looked at her and you know put her on my chest. She crawled to my breast and then never cried for 24 hours. And I was like, oh, this is a Buddha, like this is a chill child, which was very true.
There you go.
But I don't know now, knowing who she is, like that essence is not expressed right now, like from what I can see. So it's like it's a whole thing. So
Kim,
I guess there's personality and essence and like context and like
Right.
sensory overstimulation and like a lot that I think gets in the way, of like what this actually is.
so when we have a case where a community takes over a place, radical, the colonization, but what's happening in this world now in terms of, I think of, for instance, the large number of Somalis that have moved to Minneapolis, and I guess there are West Africans large in West Philadelphia now, and things of that sort. And can they change the essence of the place? I mean, it's humans belong in the whole equation. We're not outside the equation. We're not the only part of the equation, but the essence could change because a new lens comes in and sees a new capability, a new capacity.
Well, Josh, that triggers something I remember from my anthropology,
Okay.
sociology days, which is that when the Hmong refugees came to the US after the Vietnam War,
Right.
they were initially very distributed throughout the United States. But perhaps because of Minneapolis's and Minnesota's essence, word spread among the Hmong community
Acted there.
Mm-hmm.
that Minneapolis and Minnesota were a good place to be, partly because of social services.
Mhm.
And there was a very large kind of congregation there.
Right.
So in that case, I think it had something to do with at least the perceived essence of Minneapolis.
It looked nothing like Cambodia, and whereas the Germans that settlers came into central Pennsylvania because it
Right.
looked so much like Germany,
Mm.
it had
Yeah.
something that resonated immediately.
Could I pose a super quick question to the group, just telegraphically for your answer? It would help me quite a lot. Shrinking the time frame down to 5,000 years
Mm-hmm.
and comparing four cities.
Mm-hmm.
And let's start. When I read about the Charleston presentation here, I was thinking that Charleston and Philadelphia are both, this is well before this discussion. I was thinking in conversation with a friend that just came back from Paris that Paris has a very deep sense. Whenever you're anywhere in any building, you're not thinking about it at that contemporary moment of time. It has layers and layers of historical association. Philadelphia and Charleston, in the American context, are a bit like that, but nowhere as deeply layered as Paris. And then California, LA in the Joan Didion conception and the Jack Kerouac conception is a place without a history. And of course, this is from a certain privileged point of view, without a history. That's problematic. And then you look at Shanghai, which is embracing the 21st century, but of all these places, is the only place that has a really deep settled history. So when you think about those four different places, Paris, Philadelphia, Charleston, LA, and Shanghai, how do you think about the essence of a place?
You mean describe what it is, or how do you think about it?
Well, is it wrong the way that I just posed it with a 5,000 year time slice? Does that interfere with getting at what the essence of a place is, or does it have some relevance to it?
In my opinion, I think virtually all places in a 5,000 year time frame have an essence that is not changed.
Hmm.
I think like broad, deep geologic time, millions of years ago, I think that kind of geomorphic kind of change can affect what the essence of that place is. But I think if you're looking at a 5,000 year time frame, which is most of recorded human history, I buy into what Bill was suggesting, that essence doesn't change. Our understanding of it does.
Thank you. That's helpful.
I
And
think
when
that's a premise. That's a premise within this school. Doesn't mean we can't challenge that premise, but
Yeah.
and I think what I offered earlier is how do we test this? I think is the question that we should be asking. Yeah.
another thing that's coming up for me is this, every individual has an essence and every family has an essence. And I don't know, maybe there's another whole that's I could identify as well, one step out from that. But and those wholes have a relationship with the essence of place, right? And there's in a sense, an overlapping value adding process where there's some sort of nourishment that's happening there that is creating a relationship, an interdependent relationship, and what the expression of that looks like will evolve based on who those individuals and families and maybe cultures, if that's a whole, but that doesn't feel quite right. How they interact with that place that has its own essence. Yeah.
I'm seeing a contradiction between evolution and essence never changing.
Mm.
If I can do a thought problem, if you have a place that's uninhabitable for humans, not malarial swamps, things that don't lend themselves to growing food or having animals to hunt and eat, and you come in and you turn it into pick a city. Many cities have that history just because they happen to be on the water. Have we, or maybe that the essences that are on the water, and maybe it's not that, but I have to believe that just as we can change our own essence as we grow up and mature and become enlightened, have things happen in our lives, near-death experiences, and or falling in love, um, shouldn't places also have that? Since we're also inhabiting them, and it's still human eyes that are looking at it, um, can't they also evolve? And it's really depressing, to think it can't. That America's essence is what it is, and we don't have a chance of altering that essence to something that's more serving of living systems than it is right now. Is our essence an extractive, economy?
So
And can we leave it there, I
I,
suppose?
I might tend to hold that what changes and evolves is essence
Ah,
expression,
okay.
as opposed to the core of essence itself. And you mentioned, evolutionary timescales, right? Evolution moves at, pretty deep geologic kind of timescales. If you look back 5,000 years, right, have humans evolved all that much? Right? The outward expression of how we, right? But fundamentally, have we changed? I, it's a it's an open question. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna leave it there. I've got another one to hop on to as well. So thank you for the exploration.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it, Josh. It's a really interesting notion to play around with. And that's yeah. How do we test this, I think, is what I keep
Yeah,
coming back to. Yeah.
and
Thinking,
how we incorporate it into what we're doing as
yeah.
well. Make us
Mm,
better
it-
practitioners,
It's
perhaps.
good to see you all. It's been a little
Great to
while.
see you
Yeah.
all.
Spring.
Yeah. Great
Yeah.
to see you. Thanks for showing up.
Thank
Take
Bye,
care,
you.
everybody.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye.